so we were taking care of all their needs, all their medical needs, and that casualties were not that often. One of the reasons the base was there, we were halfway between the coast, which was Kunyan, and another place called Pleiku, which was really near the Cambodian border. And there was a highway, it was called Highway 9. And it was the main highway that traversed the Central Highlands and supplied Pleiku with supplies. And that highway, the convoys on that highway were a major source of casualties because there was oftentimes ambushes of the convoys, and that created the problem. And coming up to the Central Highlands from the coast, there was a pass called the Anke Pass, which was a very winding road with switchbacks that went all the way up to this plateau. I think the plateau was about, Atlanta's 1,000 feet, so that's in my mind, but I also think it was about 1,000 feet maybe, that plateau. So they had to wind up this very steep road, and that's where a lot of the ambushes occurred, and we were not that far from that spot, so we received a lot of casualties from that area. But I didn't, it was quiet, and I just read some x-rays. I think it was actually quite boring. I mean, and my day-to-day existence was quite boring, to be honest. I read a few x-rays in the morning. Sometimes I even did a GI series on a GI. But for the most part, I was finished usually within an hour and a half, and I was coming from where I was at Fort Benning. I was very used to a high volume practice, because we were very, very busy there. So it was really kind of a letdown in that regard. But so then we joined the other doctors, and we would sit around and talk, and we'd go to the PX and do the usual things, I guess.
Were you there the entire year?
I was there, most of the year. But I was with this unit the entire year, but the unit got moved at a certain point. So...
Was there anything remarkable, that you would call remarkable, that happened in that stay?
Yeah.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, the first things were like I said, I was very bored there, but I was also very frightened. Because I still hadn't got it out of my head that, I might get killed any day. And I was in that kind of I guess, first syndrome when you're first exposed to maybe a dangerous situation. And I refused, for the most part, to leave the hospital area. Now, we were just one small area in this huge camp, but I was afraid to leave the area because we had heard that they actually usually didn't attack hospitals, so I figured I was pretty safe there. Well, after about a month, I sort of became like cuckoo already. I said, this is crazy, I've got to get out of here. So I went to town. I remember I went to town, and I realized that, it seemed all right. And then
now, town is outside the perimeter.
Outside the perimeter of the base. We had a nice little town.
By about how far would you?
Oh, I'd say it was very close to the perimeter of the camp, maybe 6, 7, 8 kilometers from the perimeter of the camp. But it was a nice old town, beautiful little town, and then they had shops and they had all kinds of things there. And then I started to even go out on helicopters because I always liked to photograph. So I was able to go on on helicopters and photograph, and because we had the Red Cross choppers with us and all that. And I went to the opposite extreme. All of a sudden, I didn't want to stay on the base anymore because I was most of the time bored. And so I volunteered for a interesting project. The first Air Cav ran a dispensary in this town. It was called the Anke Dispensary. The town is actually called Antuk or Anke, and this is called the Antuk Dispensary. And it was a very big outpatient dispensary that was run by the first Air Cav, and they had full-time employees there. They had, I think, 3 sergeants signed there, and an MSc officer, a lieutenant, first lieutenant. And as it turned out, the first lieutenant, coincidentally, was at Fort Benning when I was there, and I had met him at Fort Benning. So the first day when I met him, it was kind of like a reunion. His name was Van Sprang, Lieutenant Van Sprang, who was from Brooklyn, interestingly enough, where my wife was from. So every day I would go to this dispensary, and I would work at this dispensary. I would see patients. I would make hospital rounds. And even though I was a radiologist, there wasn't any radiology.
And this is taking care of the local population?
Local population. And I would do regular medical, but I wasn't that far out of my internship. And I learned how to treat malaria and plague and a lot of things that, a lot of parasites that I had not been used to seeing. So it was a very interesting experience for me, and I really started to love the Vietnamese people. I mean, I found my experiences with the Vietnamese, both the workers that I worked with and the patients, to be, very appreciative of everything. And I actually formed an attachment to Vietnamese people. As a matter of fact, a couple interesting stories in that regard. When I used to go to town, I always took a 45 with me. Uh, I think mainly because I liked the feeling of having a 45 on my belt. I don't know, maybe it brought up feelings of when I was a child, having a pistol, because chances of me knowing how to use it very well were very nil. And one day, I worked with a Vietnamese interpreter who was actually a major in the South Vietnamese Army, who's at Arvin, who was a very nice man. And one day he said to me, Boxy, which is doctor, he says, Boxy, why do you carry the gun? And I said, I don't know, maybe I'll need it for protection. He says, let me tell you, he said, nobody is going to hurt you. Everybody knows you're helping the people here. Nobody will hurt you. But somebody may want that gun. I never wore a gun again in the rest of my career. That was the last time I ever wore a gun. So that was interesting, and I never had any problems. And sometimes I had to stay out overnight because we got caught downtown and there was a curfew and the bridge closed. We had a bridge we had to go out. We were caught downtown, and we never had.
So this area essentially was never attacked by the
Not the dispensary area or anybody that I know that ever worked for the dispensary.
How about the town?
No, the town wasn't attacked per se, no. But at night, this town became what they said was owned by the Viet Cong at night. We owned it in the daytime. They owned it at night. It was one of those situations. It was not safe at night. But apparently, it was safe for us because we never. These sergeants lived right in the town. Never had a problem. And none of us ever had a problem. So that was pretty interesting. And then like I said, I worked with the Vietnamese people, and it was a good experience. At about after we were there about 7 or 8 months, they decided. The first air care pulled out at a certain point, and
pulled out of the base completely.
Yeah, I think that was after I was there about 3 or 4 months,
Mm-hmm.
and they were replaced by segments of the 4th Division and the 173rd, and it was never again a full. Base of the type it was before. And for some reason, they decided to close the hospital. I think our volume was down. We weren't, there was no need for a full hospital there anymore, probably just a dispensary. So they decided to move the hospital to Quy Nhon, the place where I originally wanted to be and started out. And they moved us to there. Now, there was an evacuation hospital in Quy Nhon, so we didn't have to serve that, but we served as a prisoner of war hospital, which was kind of interesting in that regard as well. So we actually took care of prisoners of war, Vietnamese prisoners of war, and but that was my last 2 months.
Well, before you pass over
Yes.
that, how many were there? What kind of conditions did they live in?
I think we had about 30 or 40 prisoners in the hospital. I think their conditions were comparable to the American. The treatment we gave was very comparable to the Americans.
That was 30 or 40 in the hospital, but there was obviously, it must have been a prison camp.
Oh, yeah, but I only went out to the prison camp once. That was to give inoculations and stuff. From what I could see, it wasn't bad. Of course, they were living in pretty much jungle-type housing, but, so did we. I think it was a little more open maybe than ours. But they had roofs and they had, but it seemed like, a little more open. It looked fairly good. I remember meeting a Vietnamese doctor, a North Vietnamese doctor, because he helped us out with the giving the shots at the time, and he didn't complain, very much. I don't know, maybe he could have, but he didn't. I don't know if he had complaints or not. I don't remember asking him actually. Now that I think about it, how he treating you, is everything all right? Because I really wasn't that interested in how well they were being treated, to tell you the truth. But it seemed to be all right. Yeah, I think they probably had pretty good living conditions as far as I could see. Yeah.
So that was your last 2 months?
That was my last 2 months in Vietnam, and at that time, again being a consummate volunteer by then, and actually I think I learned maybe in my volunteer. As you know, I do a lot of volunteer work now since I went into radiological practice. But that was my first experience, and I think it boded me well in that regard. Because when I came to Quy Nhon, I found out there was a Catholic hospital in Quy Nhon. And so I went right over to the hospital and asked them if they needed a radiologist. And sure enough, they did. They had no radiologist, but they did have an X-ray department. And so I read X-rays for them for the last 2 months that I was.
And again, that was for the locals.
For the locals, yes, yes. But it wasn't as satisfying, actually. I found that as my other experience
In
because
the small village.
yeah, no, I didn't have any hand-on, experience with
Mhm.
patients because I was just seeing their X-rays and I saw a few staff people and that was it. I actually enjoyed better the direct medical care with the people because I didn't get a chance to really interact that much with the people. A few coworkers and that was it.
Anything else that you would put under, different kinds of either remarkable or interesting in either location?
Yeah, I mean there was some bad things, for example.
Example.
Well, on the I guess I never did mention, but when I was on K at the fort, it was pretty relatively quiet. I was told nothing ever happened, and after I was there, well, I didn't mention after I was there about 4 or 5 days, and this is one of the reasons I never left the hospital area. I should have mentioned that. Was I was sitting in my office like early in the morning, and all of a sudden I hear this loud booming noise, and it was a little different. We had big mortars near us, like 175 mortars that made a lot of noise, but this was different. And then the sirens went off, and we had a daytime mortar attack on the base, which was the first time that it had ever happened, like in, they said, 9 months. And of course we had to take cover and all that, and that scared, the living daylights out of me. And then the next night, I was laying in bed, and we heard it again. We had a mortar attack at night, and I didn't know what to do. And I remember getting underneath my bed and pulling the mattress down, and I was like really scared. And until somebody knocked on my door and said it was all clear, because I was afraid to even go to the bunker. I didn't know what to do, and that was why I didn't ever left actually for about a month.
So the mortar attack was in and around the hospital area?
Yeah, it was in the base, but it was not that close to the hospital. But
okay.
not knowing, we didn't know. The other real scary incident that happened on that base, I was in the afternoon taking a shower one day. It was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon when I heard this loud blast, louder than I ever heard. And I kind of ran to the door and opened the door, which was probably not smart, to see another blast. And in my mind, it was right in front of my eyes. And I just hit the deck. I was completely naked. I had no clothes. And I started crawling to the bunker. And we had a bunker right near there. And I kind of crawled to the bunker. And then sirens went off, of course. And then the all clear went. And I got up. And it turned out some sappers, which are like terrorists, had gotten onto the base and blew up the MP barracks, which were right behind the hospital.
Mm.
And it was not even a military thing. It was in retaliation for something that the MPs had done to some illegitimate business in the town, which was really interesting. And like 3 MPs were killed, and we had a few casual, wounded from that as well. So that was pretty scary. In retrospect, my life wasn't threatened, but in my mind,
At the time,
all
you
those
didn't
instances,
know that.
I didn't know that, and I felt that it was threatened. One other night, we did take sniper fire from inside the base, and that was pretty scary too. That was around the hospital, and we could see the tracer rounds. It was the only time in the whole time I was ever there, that I actually saw incoming tracer rounds into the base, near where we were actually. And the other interesting thing that happened, now I'm thinking of things, it was July 4th, I guess July 4th, 1969, and a bunch of us had gone to Quinlan to a party. The few helicopters went out and said, "Hey, there's a party at the evacuation hospital, and you want to come?" I said, "Sure." So a few of us went. We had a nice day. We were partying and drinking and what else, and celebrating July 4th. And then at night we started coming back. We had 2 helicopters, I think, and we started coming back. And as we got near the base, it was like an unbelievable sight. There was fire coming out from all of the base. I mean, tracer rounds and everything. And what it was these people celebrating.
Hmm.
Oh no, it was not July 4th. It was New Year's Eve. I'm sorry. It was New Year's Eve. And they were celebrating New Year's Eve. And they were just shooting everywhere. And the helicopters had a radio in to say, "Please stop firing. We can't approach the base. We're afraid to approach the base." Eventually, they stopped firing. Well, the next morning we learned that they were almost out of ammunition on all the perimeter of the base. They had used up so much ammunition. We didn't get attacked that night, but uh, we could have. It was pretty scary. Other incidents on the bases, I mean, number of times we had people on guard towers brought in that fell off the guard tower, that had been on drugs.
Was there a lot of drugs? I was
A lot
going
of
to ask you
drugs,
that.
a lot of drugs. Matter of fact, our base was very dangerous on payday. Um,
Hmm.
People, we knew already if today was payday, you just didn't want to walk around the base at night. There was muggings.
Hmm.
We had a big problem with drugs and things, and we had actually racial problems eventually. Not on that base, but in Quinyan, I can tell you an interesting thing about we had racial problems, which was a shock, to a lot of us. But there we had a lot of drug problems on the base, and once in a while we'd have shootings. We have actually soldiers killing each other. And I didn't tell you, we did have casualties. I mean, I did see a number of casualties from these ambushes, and some of them were horrifying. I had never seen such devastating wounds in my life. One of the most severe that I'll never forget was a black man who was in a tank, a small tank. I don't know what kind it was. They got hit by a round, and the whole thing got on fire, and they got him out. But he had you know, third-degree burns all over his body. I mean, when they brought him in, you couldn't see his skin at all. The reason I say black was they said he was a black man, but we wouldn't have known because I had never seen anything like it. And all he was screaming, I could hear those screams. I mean, it's been how many years? It's like 30, 40 years already? I don't know, 30 years.
Very cool.
And I can hear his screams, please, give me something for pain. Please, please, please. And, I know they eventually put him to sleep and he never woke up. I mean, that was his end of his pain. And it doesn't haunt me. Only when I can't say I had a dream about it. But I've told the story a few times, and every time I tell the story, it really breaks my heart. And there was a few stories like that, but that was about the worst. A couple of strange incidents that happened that are actually interesting. Now I remember, we had one guy who was a gunner on a helicopter, and the gunners would sit in the chair facing out, and they'd have a armored plate that came up pretty close, at least on this particular one, and then they had the gun in front of them, and that's how they'd operate. This guy took a round, smack in the armored plate, came right up, and took his nose off. I mean, it was the weirdest. I mean, the guy was good. He was fine. But took most of his nose off. And that guy was very lucky. And the other real interesting case was, who was also fairly lucky, but unlucky, a guy was brought in who had his arm amputated by the rear rotor of a helicopter. Because being with the 1st Air Care, we had huge amounts of helicopters on the base. It was an air mobile division. So, and the guy came in, and it was the weirdest thing because he had, of course, a tourniquet on. His arm was gone. In those days, it wasn't the option of reattaching like they would have had today, probably. And he was completely lucid. He was talking, and he kept on saying, because I went over to the emergency room there, and he kept on saying, I was being extra careful. It was my last day in country, and I was being extra careful. And what happened was, he was walking to the helicopter, and he was at the rear of the helicopter when somebody called his name, and he turned. And when he turned, his arm somehow got into the rotor, and it just amputated his arm. So, that was pretty weird.
I need to ask you a question pertaining to, the issue of, particularly at that point in time, by 1969, the anti-war movement was pretty profound.
Right.
Did it have any effect on you or the troops that you were with? I mean, or to what extent were you even aware of it?
Well, yeah, to backtrack quickly, when you asked me how I felt about going in and all that, when I went in, I was very proud. Like, I knew people in the Army, even doctors and stuff, that tried to get out when they got orders for Vietnam and things like that. I didn't at all, and I'm not saying that just because, but I felt very proud. I've always been very you know, proud to be an American. I'm also somewhat a first-generation American. And I was very proud to go, and I was very pro-Vietnam at the time. This was in '67 when I went into the military, and '68 when I went. And slowly my mind did change when I was over in Vietnam. Partly, I don't think it was so much for the anti-war movement, but it was things I saw myself. But I believe the anti-war movement did affect the troops because there was a lot of people that by that time seemed to be against the war. Um, and they had to be getting information from home. They were much more advanced than I was, for example. I remember I had a corpsman who was really anti-war, and he was trying to cause trouble and things like that. And he was getting information. I really didn't have that much information, but I wasn't very happy with what I was seeing, to tell you the truth. No, at first I was. I thought, we're here to help the people. We're going to win this war. It's going to be great. And I remember talking to somebody, because at that time, I think Johnson had this huge buildup. They added another couple, 300,000 troops. And I remember talking to this Vietnamese interpreter. We were talking about it, and he was very depressed, and things are not good. And I said, don't worry. They're sending in all these troops, and I had this feeling of invincibility. We're Americans, and we're sending in 200,000 troops. It's over now. You know, surely it will be over now. Well, you know, of course it didn't. But the reason I got depressed after a while was I saw, number one, a lot of atrocities, not a lot, but a number of atrocities that were performed, which really disturbed me, to the Vietnamese. I don't, you know, I'm not saying that was an army policy. It was not. But among various soldiers, there was, you know, we ran into atrocities, rape, even killings, things like that to the local population. I saw some of it when I was at the prisoner of war hospital, because we'd get in prisoners directly from the field, if they were in our area, to be interrogated if they were wounded right at the hospital, you know, if they had minor wounds. And a lot of times after the interrogation, the interrogators would come out and say, these are not prisoners, these are, you know, it was somebody in the wrong place. They would drop a helicopter and they'd yell, stop or we'll shoot. These people, you know, women and children, they would run and they get shot, women and children. And we understand, you know, that women and children sometimes are a danger too, but when they're running away, you know, they weren't a danger per se. And, you know, you see some of that, it really kind of soured me. And also the discrepancy between the officers a lot of times and the field men. I mean, in that war, that I felt that most of the high officers stayed in nice places in the rear. They were in Saigon, they were in Quy Nhon, they were in, you know, even when they were in An Khê, they were in nice quarters. And a lot of them were not out in the field, and the ones that were getting killed, you know, were first lieutenants and were enlisted men, and you know, it was just a discrepancy that I found hard to deal with, and I wasn't very happy. So by the time I actually came home, I was pretty anti-war. I never became part of the anti-war movement because I was too busy, to be honest, in my own career and getting back my life in order, and I wasn't about to do anything, although I was approached, actually, to do something in the anti-war, and I refused. I just didn't feel it was, I was going to do that. But, and to be honest, and to me, the ultimate insult to me was, when I came back from Vietnam, we flew into Fort Lewis, Washington on a charter also, and we came in there at about 4 o'clock in the morning. And you would think, I mean, everybody on this plane had served at least a year in Vietnam, or thereabouts. I had served, as it turned out, 11 months or so. But there was nobody on the base to welcome us. We couldn't even get a cup of coffee at 4 o'clock in the morning. The base was completely closed. And right away, I a lot of us were, I was very upset. You would think, you know, that the Army would have treated us somewhat nice. Because you talk about the general population, you know. Everybody said, no, the general population didn't treat the troops right. Well, neither did the Army, I felt at the time, and I feel so today. And I remember we had to wait till 6 or 6:30, and then they opened up and we were able to get coffee. And then my total insult came because I was getting out of the Army. I was GROSing, I think it was called, getting out. And so before I got out, this was my last assignment. I had
at Fort Lewis?
Yeah, I was actually leaving the Army at Fort Lewis. I had to see a recruitment officer. which was fine. You know, I understood the theory behind it, and it was fine. I didn't mind that. So my last duty in the army was going to be see this recruiting officer, which I did, and he turned out to be a major. And he spoke to me about re-upping, and I said no. I've been 2 years and spent a year in Vietnam. I've got a baby, and I don't want to go back again. I have to finish my training, and you can train in the army and all that. Well, I'll look at some other option right now where I feel I just would like to go home, see my family, and spend time with my family. And then he looked at me and he said, he said, your haircut is in regulation. And this guy was on the street. My haircut. Well, I said, well, sir, I've spent just a year in Vietnam, and I just came back, and it was fine there, and I'm going home now, and he says, well, we're not going to issue you your army pay, and I was due a lot of money at that time, unless you get a haircut. So if you don't get a haircut, you're going to have to receive your pay from the base near wherever you live, and go in there. So, which was really not an option because I really needed the money, like right then and there. And so my last duty, instead of becoming a recruitment, became getting a haircut. And it was an army haircut. I mean, it was like a short haircut. And from then on, I didn't have a lot. Well, until actually Desert Storm, I guess. My feelings about the army were always negative. I changed again in Desert Storm. But now I'm very pro-army again. But
So after Fort Lewis, after the haircut and the pay, you flew to...
I flew to LaGuardia Airport, probably, and met my family there.
And you're now out of the army.
I'm out of the army. Of course, it was nice to see my family, my parents, and my wife, and my in-laws, and my daughter. It was strange with my daughter because there was a year difference. She was like 8 months, I guess, when I left or so, 9 months, and then she was a year later. So she was a little person already. But she was very strange with me. She thought I was a tape recorder because I used to send home tapes every week. So when Doris would say, "Where's Daddy?" she would point to the tape recorder. And I was kind of like a stranger in the house, and that was, a little uncomfortable for me because everything was Mommy's, nothing was Daddy's. And Doris lived in Brooklyn near her mother while I was in Vietnam. And so when we came back, we had to pack up and move to Detroit, where I was going to finish my residency that I had started just before I entered the Army. And which we did. We went out there and went to Detroit, and I finished my residency. We had another baby, Michelle.
How long did you stay in Detroit for your residency?
3 years.
So
Well, no, 2.5 years.
So you had another 2.5 years.
Another 2.5 years.
Complete.
Yeah. So I completed 2.5 years because they gave me 6 months credit for the Army, and I didn't have to do the 3 months. But
so even though you were in for 2 years, you only received 3 months credit.
6 months credit.
6 months credit.
Yeah,
okay.
6 months. I received 6 months credit, and then they gave me work experience credit. So I didn't have to wait to take my certification boards. I took them right away, right after I finished my residency, which was nice, because I didn't have to study them while I was in practice, which made it very easy for me.
Did you find that the experiences that you had in the Army put you ahead, if you will, of the time frame in terms of the learning process? I mean, were there things that you were being taught that you already knew as a result of that?
Yeah, I felt I had very good practical experience. I mean, compared to the other residents, for example, I could look at an X-ray and I knew pretty much whether it was normal or not. And that's a big thing in radiology, just to separate the normal from the abnormal. The problem was I couldn't give you a good differential diagnosis. I couldn't tell you what 12 diseases would cause that particular finding because I didn't have a lot of book knowledge. Although I had books with me over there, and I thought I would do a lot of studying when I was in Vietnam. And I did have a lot of downtime. I could have studied, but I guess there was a certain degree of depression because most of us found we didn't read very much, and it surely wouldn't study. I tried to a few times, but it just never was easy for me. So I actually didn't study at all. I did a little reading, but not much either, probably reading either. So, but I was very hungry to learn, and I had a lot of practical knowledge, and it was a very good experience for me. Yeah, I think the Army experience did me very well in radiology for the rest of my life. It was very helpful.
Okay, so now you're a full doctor. You're out of your residency. What was the next step?
Well, I was offered two jobs actually. I, one job I was offered right at the place where I was training. They offered me, which was a very nice honor and position to stay. And then I had a friend who I hope you'll interview, Terry Schwartz, and he went to practice in Atlanta, Georgia. And he told me that they needed a radiologist down in Atlanta at this hospital, and that I should have, come down and apply for the job. And I remembered Atlanta when I was at Fort Benning because we had been up a few times, and it was a nice small city, and we kind of liked it. And I came down, I interviewed for the job, and I was offered the job, and so I had to make the decision between staying at a big, teaching hospital, which I enjoyed, or going to a nice city, which I thought might be more enjoyable as far as compared to Detroit. And it was actually, to me, a tough decision. For Doris, it was a no-brainer. Let's go to Atlanta. So,
What was the name of the hospital in Atlanta?
in Atlanta, it was called Doctor's Hospital. Doctor's Hospital at the time. And so we went to we decided to go to Doctor's Hospital. I remember they were really bugging me on Detroit, and I was still down here trying to decide, and I had to call up to Detroit and tell them, even though I was going back to Detroit yet, that I wasn't taking the position. It was really rather difficult. And the funny part is, about 2 years later, I missed all that academic stuff, and I called up and I thought about getting a job again up there, and I was offered a position again up there. And I went up and spoke to them, and I remember meeting a few of my radiology friends older than me that had been in practice, had nothing to do with this place. We went out for drinks, and Doris was with us, and they said, I don't understand, why do you want to leave Atlanta for Detroit? And I said, well, I want to see more interesting cases. And they both looked at each other and laughed. I said, are you happy in Atlanta? And I said, yeah, we love it. He said, interesting cases? Are you crazy? That's not what it's about. It was a good lesson too, I thought, obviously we stayed in Atlanta, and it was a good decision for us. We've loved Atlanta.
Now, you didn't always stay with the same hospital, did you?
I actually did. The hospital was bought out by Hospital Corporation of America, and they built a new hospital. It was called North Lake Regional Medical Center, and then that was bought out by Columbia, but then it was bought out by Emory. And so, I mean, the hospital's changed hands a number of times, but
What is the name today?
Today it's, I think it's still North Lake Regional Medical Center. Yeah.
But it's controlled by Emory?
Yeah, controlled by Emory. And the corporation. I think there's some kind of a partnership. I don't know exactly how it works right now.
Now, you do a lot of volunteer work.
Yes.
Just give an overview of what you do.
Well, first of all, I always volunteered at the hospital as well. I mean, I was chief of staff at the hospital, and I was actually chairman of the board of the hospital. I was on the board of the hospital. I did a lot of work in the Georgia Osteopathic Medical Association. I became president of that eventually. In the American Osteopathic College of Radiology, I was president of that. I served on the board of radiology for 9 years. So I did a lot of professional stuff. And then locally in the community, I always was very active. I do a lot of Jewish charitable work. I've worked with the United Jewish Appeal almost my entire career for the last 25 years, fundraising and educating and things of that regard. Over the last few years, I've gotten involved in an organization that we started in Atlanta called Jewish Healthcare International. It's an interesting organization in which we provide medical care to the former Soviet Union, countries in the former Soviet Union, and we have teams of physicians that are combined, usually half of Americans and half Israelis, and we go into third countries like the Ukraine or Moldova or Riga, Latvia, and we provide training at the bedside and put on courses for the physicians and nurses and home health care workers, and we try to elevate their standards to Western standards, because we found that in some of these countries the standards are like they were in this country maybe in the 50s. It's hard to believe, but like in the Ukraine, you go into a hospital in the Ukraine, you would think you were in a hospital in the 1950s in the United States. It's so bad. So I've gotten involved in that, and that's been a very good experience for us, for me. And then I retired 4 years ago. And my love now, my passion, other than my family, is photography. And I'm very interested in serious photography. I've had one exhibition at the Bremen Museum, which is a Jewish museum in town, last summer, which I just found out last week is going to travel to Larchmont, New York, with an exhibit in New York next year at a synagogue museum there, which I'm excited about because I'll get my chance from my New York friends to see my stuff. And now I'm working on a couple photographic projects as well. So.
Okay. Now, you mentioned your family. Your family is a lot larger than just
Oh,
two
yeah,
daughters.
that's right, right. I've been blessed that both my daughters are married. They married, one married a local boy, Mark Antibes, and one married a boy from New York who she convinced to move to Atlanta as well. And his name is Michael Penn, and they both live in Alpharetta, which is a suburb right here in Atlanta, 20 minutes from our home. And we are blessed with two children from Barry, a boy, Alec, and a girl, Molly, 6.5 and 3.5. And Michelle has a son, 5.5, and twin boys, 2.5. So that keeps us very busy as well.
What are the twins' names?
Twins' names are Brian and Evan, and Jacob is the older boy. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to add?
No, it's been a great life actually, and we've had some problems this year in our family with health issues that thank God us personally, but we've had a lot of deaths around us and friends, and we're so blessed. I mean, to live in this country at this time and to be healthy relatively and have healthy families, and I really feel very blessed, and I'm very proud to be an American actually.
Fred, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
My pleasure.